So instead of bringing up some speakers for this month, we decided that it would be a good idea to maybe teach you some new skills, right? Because never too late to learn some new skills. And we've all been talking about COVID, so I promise I'm not going to teach you how to wash your hands, and I'm not going to teach you how to wear a mask, okay? Everybody's got that mastered, I'm sure. So we're going to go over Stop the Bleed. So Stop the Bleed is an international program started in the United States, and this is sounds pretty self-explanatory, right? So this is to stop catastrophic bleeding. And when we think about that, we think about all different types of things, but a lot of times people are talking about, gunshot wounds, right? And that's not what we're necessarily here to talk about, because everybody's had a severe bleed, one time or another, whether they cut their finger. How many of you have tried cooking? I don't actually cook, I've tried, so I'll go on that try route. But the skills that we're going to show you, you can use for any time that you may have a bleed. And you'll be starting to notice, or you may have already noticed, if you go to different communities and you go to different areas, they have these kits that are labeled with this Stop the Bleed symbol. We've all seen AEDs in airports and other community settings. Stop the Bleed kits now are showing up in community settings throughout the country. And unfortunately, part of that is a sign of the times. And when we talk about that, just in the past 14 days, there's been 30 people killed in mass shootings. So a mass shooting is 4 or more people and 124 injured. That's just in the past 14 days ending yesterday, right, in the United States. So we're not going to talk about how to fix that problem, okay? But we are going to teach you some skills to help if that does happen, or if you cut yourself cutting a pepper, all right? Same thing works for all of that. Right? And when I talk about these Stop the Bleed kits, some of them are small. You'll notice a little black pouch on my bag, so I carry mine with me everywhere. I'm not sure why someone wants a picture, but that's okay. So
You leave famous everywhere on the internet.
well, what's going to happen is we're going to talk about some of these skills and some of the things that you may find in these community settings. And next time, you guys are all going to get to play with them and practice. Right? Practice on yourself, or we may even let you practice on your neighbor. So sit next to somebody that, it's going to be a little bit of pressure. So if there's someone you want to inflict that pressure on, sit next to them. So I don't know, there seems to be someone everyone wants to sit next to. So the biggest thing that you have to help with any of these situations we're going to talk about is your hands, right? So everybody has hands with them today, right? Nobody left them at home. If you have one hand, an elbow, a knee, a foot, guess what? You have the ability to help somebody who has a catastrophic bleed. That's it. You don't need all these fancy tools that we're going to show you. They help, but you can do it with what you have. All right, so these are the groups that were involved in this. The trauma committee from the American College of Surgeons, and, the NAEMT, this National Association of EMTs, and the Committee on Tactical Casualty Combat Care. So a lot of the skills that we're going to teach you were developed initially for wartime, but again, they work with everything. We have to display this, okay? Some of them may be disturbing. I will tell you, I removed about I think I removed 100% of those images, but we still have to display that. So the number one cause of preventable injury or preventable death after injury. So this is not, to say a medical condition, but after injury is bleeding. Simple bleeds, can affect people and can cause death within, 90 seconds. So it's important, people may know how to call 911. We're not going to be there in 90 seconds, okay? And some people may think we drive a little fast, but not that fast. We can't get there in 90 seconds. The drones haven't been perfected yet to get there in 90 seconds. So this is all part of a process. So, and we talk about where we can use the training, and we talked about, obviously, the thing we never want to have to experience is some type of gunshot wound, but, in your home, in your building, from weather, you're cutting down a tree, car accidents, in your car, little things, even if it's just a cut to your finger, the skills that we're going to teach you will help you. So we have to identify everything, right? So we have to identify, how do you identify somebody who's bleeding? You see blood, right? Okay, so we've identified that when you see blood, so, we all tell our kids, don't worry, all bleeding eventually stops, right? So, we want to make sure, I told my kids this often, now that they're older, they don't think it's as funny, but we want to make sure that we're the mechanism to make it stop. So, your safety in any of these cases is the first priority. So if someone's bleeding and you're not safe to provide them aid, for whatever the reason might be, okay, don't do it. Okay? Rule of thumb, don't do it. Okay? So if it's because of, whatever the situation may be, if there's something out there that's going to be a risk to you or a hazard to you, then all you need is your cell phone. Right? Call for help. But don't actually put yourself in a position where you're going to get hurt. Because if you get hurt before you call 911, who's going to help both of you? So, wear gloves if you can. Even if it's a family member, okay? That's up to you, whether you want to wear gloves or not, okay? We're not going to cast any judgment. And probably because of what I do for a living, I carry gloves with me all the time. And I say all the time, they're in the glove box of my car. I take them to the beach. They're in the beach bag right next to the suntan lotion. I may have a problem. I'll admit that. But the goal is we don't want to contaminate somebody else. So if you get blood on you, just make sure you clean it. Okay, you want to make sure you talk to your healthcare provider in the event that you do. And we have to share that information with you. But in most cases, you're probably going to use these skills on a loved one who you probably share a house with. So, remember we talked about calling 911, right? That number one, you got to get help coming. So if you notice somebody who has, a lot of bleeding, you got to get help. So let's call somebody. Call them first. Then we're going to identify where they're bleeding from. Because we're going to teach you how to use a tourniquet. And it's important that you identify where the bleeding's coming from, because just placing a tourniquet on their neck if they're bleeding from their leg, not going to help them a lot. Okay? Now, if they're yelling at you, it might. Okay? Or at least might make it easier for you. And compress, because we talked about the two most important things you come with every day, right? Your hands, your elbows, your knees, your feet. Because sometimes you may be in a position where putting a lot of pressure with your hand isn't practical. Okay? You have arthritis, you have other conditions, your hand is hurt, you're not in a good position. Guess what? The elbow does the same thing, the knee does the same thing, your foot does the same thing. So it doesn't have to be with a hand. All right. So I don't think anybody here ever not dial 911. Okay, not call 911. So when you call 911, they're going to ask you right away, where are you? Okay. They want a callback number, and they're going to want to know what's going on. As quickly and as succinctly as possible what's going on. Right? So if you haven't called 911, the dispatcher may be a little bit quick with you because they want to get that information as fast as possible so they can get the help that needs to go to you as fast as possible. So if it started with a walk in the woods, they don't need to know that. Okay? They just need to know what ended at the walk in the woods, or what ended your walk in the woods, and where are you now? And follow their instructions, because they're going to provide you, in a lot of cases, some instruction. And depending on where you are, they may provide you with a lot of instruction. And all of a sudden, you're going to go, I remember what Art told me 3 years ago. That's the goal, okay? That you remember at least some part of that.
Hey, Art,
Yes.
I just wanted to share something that I learned from my daughter. For people who have iPhones, if you push your side lock button like 4 times rapidly in a row, your phone will automatically dial 911. Found that out the wrong way, but it is.
That's good to know.
Depending on what situation you're in, if you have an iPhone, that is something that helps.
Do we want to No, don't.
Oh, they'll call you right back.
Yeah. No. Yeah, technology is great, especially when we all know it's there. That's good information. I had no idea that the lock button did that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I know my watch does it. That's why I don't wear it, because I'm constantly hitting the button and it's called 911. It's nothing worse than calling 911 when you're actually on a 911 call. I've done that. So we've alerted 911, and now we have to identify where they're bleeding from. Okay. So here we see a leg, and hopefully that image is small enough, and trust me, it's not a real bleed, okay? So don't get too grossed out, it's not real. It's a piece of plastic. So we identify where they're bleeding from. So we want to know, is it continuous? Is it a large volume? Is it pooling? So when we say continuous, are they actually still bleeding? Many times you see someone who's hit their head. Okay? Kids are great for this. They run into coffee tables. There's magnets. They put them inside the coffee table to draw the kid right to the corner. And it happens all the time. And the scalp bleeds a lot.
Yeah.
But it also stops relatively quickly. So we've identified there's blood on the floor. We don't know what it's from. We see somebody who looks like they're injured. We called 911, did that first. Now we go over and we look, and we notice that there's no current bleeding, okay? So that's great. The bleeding stopped on its own, as it's supposed to. So all we're going to do is provide them some support till help gets there. But if we notice now that that bleeding's still coming out, we have to move on to the next step. So is it a large volume? We've all scraped our hands on something, and you get that bleed from, we call it road rash. And it's kind of oozes, but it's not pouring out, right? So we clean it, we cover it, and we're good. That's not large volume. But large volume is where, we see blood that's constantly flowing, can create a puddle, can create a pool. And the size of the pool and the puddle, we don't really care, okay? Because if it's still coming out, that's all we care about. So don't worry about getting the tape measure. So, and there may be multiple places, because most people have a tendency to, if you cut your hand, you usually cut it in one spot sometimes. But a lot of times you see people that cut their hands, they cut them because they were trying to do something with a knife they shouldn't have. And knife slips, it cuts a couple fingers, okay? So sometimes it's not in one spot, it's in two. So that's important to know. And also that clothing. So we don't do it to be offensive, but a lot of times we remove people's clothing. Okay? And we do that because things can be hidden underneath clothes. Right? And just because there's some kind of hole that's been created, whether it was a knife or whatever, that doesn't always necessarily bleed to the outside. So we want to make sure that we see that. So if there's any question as to where they're bleeding from, and you have to remove some articles of clothing to find that, do that. Okay, that's important. So arms, legs, necks, armpit, groin, body. We talk about all these different areas. So couple key things. Okay, we're going to talk about pressure. It will never be acceptable when we do this, and I'll remind you all again, when we do the hands-on, it's never acceptable to place both hands around someone's neck to apply pressure, and it's never acceptable to put a tourniquet on someone's neck. Okay? We're all clear on that, right? But all of these areas, we're gonna go over some quick skills on how you can control these. So the number one is compression. Remember we talked about that with your hands. So here you'll notice they took, it's probably the t-shirt from somebody, but any kind of clean or relatively clean. If you look and you have nothing else and you're looking at somebody and saying, well, they're bleeding, but geez, you know, everything around me is dirty. So guess what? A dirty wound that's not bleeding is better than a clean wound on a dead person, okay? So at the end of the day, if dirt gets in it, it is not the end of the world. That can be fixed, okay? But if they bleed out, you can't fix that. So don't look at it going, you know, the only thing I have is all greasy. That's okay. Use it. And here they're using two hands, but when we talk about that, you know, you can put that rag on and use your elbow. You can use your knee. You can use your foot. Remember we talked about gloves, right? So you fold that up and you apply pressure with your foot. Okay? So you don't have something to be able to put that pressure, you know, to be able to touch, use your hands, use your foot. Okay? Most of the time we have shoes. That'll provide that protection. Okay? So there are options out there. And again, we have to go through the slides. The hands-on stuff is much more fun. So we want to apply that pressure directly over the wound. So when you look at, that's why it's important to remember when we're looking at the wound and we're removing that piece of clothing, to make sure you know where it is. Okay? Not roughly where it is, okay, but where is it? Okay? We're going to put that pressure on. Enough gauze or cloth to cover the injury as long as you have it. Okay. So if you're using a shirt and it's covering up half their leg and you only have a small spot, then don't worry about it. Just put it on, put the pressure on. If the pressure stops the bleeding, guess what? You did a great job. Great job. Perfect. Now, that doesn't mean, oh, I can go back and sit down, bleeding stopped, right? There's what's stopping it. The pressure. So what do we need to keep? The pressure. That can be relieved from one person to the other because, you know, this is Vermont. So who knows where this is going to happen. You may not be close to a road or someplace where people are going to find you in the next 5 minutes. Right? So if you're applying pressure for 20 minutes, that's a long time. And that's a long, you know, it's tough. So that's where we talked about different extremities, right? Different body parts. You move around a little bit because you're going to need to move. Somebody else takes your place as long as you continue to apply pressure. So you're going to get to play with these. So because we're not actually going to create wounds on anybody. Okay?
Darn.
All right, at least if you do, you don't tell me. Okay, so the carpets, we're going to be in this room next time? Carpet's the right color. So this is just to show what a penetrating wound, or you know, this is the person who's out there carving, okay? And we see this a lot. You're carving a piece of wood, you know, kids decide they're going to go out and they're going to make a walking stick, and what do? You sit down and you put that stick where? On your lap. And you start carving, and it goes into the thigh. Okay? We see this often. So you're gonna see how to actually stop the bleeding on that. So aside from pressure, you know, we're gonna do some other things with that too. So, and we're gonna teach you how to pack a wound. The reason why we're gonna teach you this is because in those kits that you see on the wall, there's material in there to pack a wound. All right, I saw some faces back there like, so. It's, hopefully you're not gonna do it every day, okay? But you never know when these things are gonna happen. So, and I've taught this program to all my kids, okay? They're older now, and you hope that they never get to use it, right? So, but you never know. You know, I come from Western Mass. You know, not a lot happens in Western Mass. Kind of like, you know, maybe a little bit more than happens here, but not a lot, right? So, but my daughter's in the airport. She's going to Florida for her swim team practice in college. So what airport do they fly into? Fort Lauderdale. What happens at the Fort Lauderdale airport? They had a mass shooting while she was there. So she didn't get to do any of these things, but she saw it, because remember, what's that first thing? Are you safe? So she wasn't. So she wasn't in a safe position to do it. So we tell you these things thinking, man, when am I ever going to get exposed to them? You never know. Right? And in those kits, there's material to provide that packing. So we're going to show you how to use it. You're going to get to play with it. You're going to get to actually pack some of those fake wounds in the plastic. Okay? No real ones, no real blood. So you actually get to see it, play with it, feel it, and understand how it works. And the key there is pressure, the same as the pressure that we put on the outside of the wound. And the reason why we do this is because inside of that gauze material, there's a product in there that helps the blood vessel, or helps the blood to clot. It helps to stop the bleeding where it's coming out. So, all right, we'll quickly go through that, because we're going to talk more about that later when we do the hands-on. So, the other thing is tourniquet. So 2 to 3 inches above the wound. Again, the rule is 2 to 3. If you're 4 inches above the wound, that's okay. All we want is what? What's our end goal here? Stop the bleeding. Wow, you guys are great. So you passed. Stop the bleeding, right? So we don't care how high up it goes. And we're going to show you what some of the tourniquets that are out there, because again, these all come in these kits that you see in a whole bunch of public buildings around. And now that I've told you this, the next time you go into a public building, you're going to start looking for them. I know it. And when you go to the airport, look in the airport. Airports seem to have these. They seem to be the biggest building that has them. And large-scale sporting and music venues, they all seem to have them, and they're usually mounted right above the AED. So next time you're in some of these places, look. So we're going to place it, you never place it over the elbow or the knee. I think that's pretty obvious, right? You know, we can't compress the elbow or knee. We can, but trust me, we can compress it. But it's going to hurt. It's not going to give us the desired effect. Because what we're trying to do is to compress the vessel against a large bony surface, which would be your upper arm, your upper leg. And that doesn't happen inside the kneecap. Okay? So, other than cause a lot of pain, it's not going to do a lot else. And we're going to tighten until the bleeding stops. We have fake limbs that you're going to get to put these on. I would say you can put them on each other, but it's probably, we do it on each other to practice. I'm not going to ask you to do it on each other. You'll end up with bruises that you're going to have to explain to someone. And it does hurt. So, you know, they're not without pain. But pain's a good thing, because that means that they're alive, they're talking to you. And, you know, I always tell people, the more it hurts, the better we're doing at stopping that bleeding. And we never remove it. Even if it doesn't completely stop it, we never remove it, because why? It slowed it down at least, or it has stopped it. And if we remove it, we don't want to go out and say, well, let me see if it's still bleeding, and we loosen it. No. Okay. Once it's on, it stays on. You can apply it to yourself, and when we practice it on the things, you'll see how, you know, this is not like, you know, people who went through, how many of you went through Boy Scouts? All right, so you learned how to make these out of a cravat and a dowel, right? Okay, and you all learned how to make that little fancy ears over the end of the dowel. Right? Well, the new ones, you don't have to do any of that. This is all Velcro and fancy plastic. So it can be applied over clothes. You can put it on yourself. They hurt. Did I tell you that before? They hurt. Okay. Anybody who wants to find out how much you can put it on yourself. Next time we do the demo, you absolutely are going to get to play with them. You can put it on yourself if you want. Sometimes you need a second one. So sometimes you put one on, the bleeding slows down, but it doesn't stop. You can put another one above, always above the one that you put on. And these only go where? On the arms and on the legs, okay? Where do we never put a tourniquet? On the neck. Very good. All right. All right. So we're going to save all of this. So there's a million different brands, but they all pretty much work the same. And we're going to get to play with them. You guys are going to get to see them, touch them all the next time. So the goal was to spend some time going over the stuff that we're required to cover, and the next time to have the fun. All right, so they have a whole list of recommended tourniquets. Our recommendation is use whatever works, okay? So these are all recommended things. I mean, we teach people how to use shoelaces, ties. You can use anything. Use a belt. Belts don't work that well because leather's kind of hard to maneuver, but so there's a whole bunch of options there. So that limb tourniquet, we're not going to cover limb tourniquets here like that. So children, unless they're very, very young, the same practices, the same tourniquets, the same material that you use on an adult can be used on a child. It all works pretty much the same. Okay? Except that they're really small, obviously their limbs are too small to fit into the tourniquets that we currently use. We're going to pack them the same way. Direct pressure, so for the most part, in little kids, direct pressure does most of what you need. Very seldom do you see tourniquets on little kids. Usually direct pressure will take care of it. Even with the scalp, so when someone, they run into that coffee table and they're bleeding, hand, head, okay, that's it. Put some pressure, firm pressure, there you go. Okay? Now, that head wound probably hurts, right? They hit a table. They probably have a bruise. The biggest thing, and this happens with adults or kids, you're going to put pressure on something that they just hurt. What do you think that does? Hurts, right? So it hurts. You have to get beyond the fact that they start telling you it hurts, okay? You have to just go past that, okay? That happens even if you do something to yourself and and you have to put pressure on your hand. It may hurt. But remember, pain in this case is a good thing, right? All right, so, impaled objects. Improvised tourniquets, you can use a whole bunch of things. We'll show you a couple quick things, but it's mainly that you understand how the stuff that you may see in a community setting will work. And that's our goal, is to teach you that stuff. So, loss of an arm or leg, yes, that can happen. Prior to the application of a tourniquet. Putting on a tourniquet does not cause you... How many people have heard that if I put a tourniquet on, they're going to lose their arm, they're going to lose their leg? How many people have heard that? Okay. So, how many of you have had surgery on your hand or your foot? You've all had a tourniquet. Okay? They put tourniquets on extremities to do hand, foot surgery. To do sutures, they put tourniquets on if they're on the hands or for the leg. So, how many of you have lost a hand or a leg after you had hand or foot surgery in the room? None of them, right? So, tourniquets do not equate to loss of a limb. Right? That's an old thing. They've been using tourniquets for years in the military and having them on for 4, 5, 6 hours, and they've been able to get full circulation and full range of motion back to that extremity. So we're not concerned about that. Pain, we talked about that. It hurts. The worse the injury, the less it hurts because they're distracted by the pain from the injury. So, but again, pain's not a bad thing. Don't stop because it hurts. All right, so remember, you need to be safe. Number one, you need to be safe. If you're not safe, what are you doing? Call 911, that's it, just call 911. We have to find the bleeding and find the active bleeding. So we want to know, is it actually still bleeding? If it is, we're going to take some action. If not, we're gonna reassure them till help gets there. Am I still on time? Okay.
Yep.
1:30, we're gonna be done by 1:30, promise. So compress, what are you compressing with? Hands, elbows, feet, knees, yep. I mean, I suppose you could sit on them too. So, I'll leave that to your discretion, so.
Don't sit on their neck.
Probably be a bad idea, yes, yes, and where do the tourniquets never go?
Neck.
On their neck, all right. So, so a tourniquet is nothing more than compression. The difference is, when we're talking about compressing, we're talking about, with our hands, we're compressing right on the wound, right? When we're talking about with a tourniquet, we're compressing how far above the wound?
2 to 3 inches.
2 to 3 inches. You guys are great. This is better than the last class. And you're going to wait for help to arrive. Who would that help be?
You.
All right, could be me. Could be me. I'm normally in my office, so if I'm coming out,
bad.
so, but could be somebody else in the house too, right? They could be that help. So you may be providing that pressure until somebody else comes to assist you with that. So hopefully I kept it to a half hour.
If there is a neck wound, how do you know how much pressure to apply to stop?
So we're going to go over that in the next time, but you know what? If you, as long as you're applying pressure to one side, so we would never apply to both sides, but to one side, the right amount of pressure is whatever it takes to stop the bleeding. If you're only pressing on one side and not the other, you cannot put enough pressure to stop them from breathing. Okay? It's when you do this, that could stop them from breathing. And also would shut off blood flow to the brain, which is a bad thing. I know some of you are looking around going, I don't use it that much anyways. But you know, so my wife says that to me all the time. But anyway, so as long as you're pressing on one side, you're fine. Any other questions?
You skipped over the impaled objects line.
I did.
Was that, I guess, the common thing I've always heard is if there's something sticking in someone, you leave it in there.
Just
Is that
leave it there.
correct?
That's it. Just leave it there. So, and we skipped over it because we're going to cover that a little bit in a little bit more detail because, but whenever you're applying pressure, it's just pressure around it, never on top of it. So if it's impaled, the goal is not to make it more impaled, but also not to remove it because it could be obstructing blood flow, which is a good thing in this case. We want it to stop the flow of blood out. So. And in most cases, you won't, the odds of seeing something impaled are pretty slim, even with a knife, because most people, when they accidentally cut themselves, the first thing they do is, ow, and they pull it back. You know, very, very seldom would you see that unless it was intentional, unfortunately. No, you know, or hunting. So how many of you bow hunt? Right? That's usually where we see impaled objects. Don't pull it out. You're not going to be able to pull it out anyways, but don't pull it out and just leave it there. So, I don't know. Mary looked a little bit squeamish there. So, I promise I will have no real demonstrations of that. Any other questions? Think positive.